All right, guys, I'm recording a video lesson for you all while you're sitting in class. Apparently, I had some mistake and we're having to reload the video. So I'm going to take another shot at talking about the second New Deal. After the first 100 days, Roosevelt then moves to expand the New Deal to include more of the reform and recovery aspects rather than just relief. So we're going to talk about some of the key programs of the second 100 days, the second New Deal, and also what its impacts are on organized labor. We're also going to talk about the key events of the 1937 election and how Roosevelt gets tripped up a little bit in 1937. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how the New Deal continues and ultimately how it ends. Roosevelt launched the second New Deal in the spring of 1935. They started with a law that extended government oversight into the banking industry and also raised taxes on the wealthy. Also, Congress funded some new relief programs. The Emergency Relief Appropriations Act stopped direct payments to Americans and formed what was known as the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. And this is the largest peacetime jobs program in American history. It also passed in the Social Security Act, which provided guaranteed regular payments for people 65 and older, and also included a system of unemployment and disability insurance as well. And of course, Social Security is still with us today in many ways. Well, the second New Deal also focused heavily on organized labor and reviving or reinvigorating American workers' ability to organize and strike and fight for their rights in other ways. The National Industrial Recovery Act, or the NIRA, guaranteed workers the right to form unions and bargain collectively, which means they could work as a group to bargain for the best possible deal with management rather than having to work as individual employees. Roosevelt also backed the Wagner Act, which is also called the National Labor Relations Act, and this basically outlawed a lot of anti-labor practices and established the National Labor Relations Board, which is a federal government arm of the federal government that has authority to conduct voting to decide if there's going to be a union in certain workplaces, and basically it allows workers to unionize without the presence or pressure of management influencing elections. The Committee for Industrial Organization was not a New Deal program, but it was a new labor union that was born in 1935. Under the leadership of John L. Lewis, it broke away from the American Federation of Labor. United Auto Workers is one of the most powerful divisions of the CIO, and it launched a successful sit-down strike in 1936. That sit-down strike is much different than a regular strike. The normal strike workers just walk off the job and refuse to go back to work, which means that employers can then bring other workers in to run the factory. In a sit-down strike, instead of walking off the job, they basically show up to work and they don't work. So that basically prevents employers from bringing in more people to end the strike. So election of 1936 comes along. Leading up to the election, Roosevelt passed the Rural Electrification Act, which provided electricity to millions of rural Americans and farmers. He also, during the election, during the campaign, showcases his achievements. From 1932 to 1936, employment had been cut in half. Income and business earnings were up. And the New Deal programs have provided a lot of hope and help to Americans. And he really had a populist message during this election, kind of attacking big business and saying, if these are the guys that are against me, you know that I'm fighting for the common man. So that election really, that message really carries him into the election. Now, he did have critics. Republicans specifically argued that the New Deal was overly bureaucratic. It was too much government, and they also argued that it created a planned economy. Essentially, the same kind of arguments here today about certain things about, it's communist. And a lot of people made that argument. The American Liberty League, for instance, tried to stop his attacks on big business. However, the Republican nominee, Alf Landon, simply just didn't pose a serious threat to Roosevelt in the 1936 election. So the result was a crushing defeat for the Republicans and a landslide victory for Roosevelt. Landon only carried 2 states, I think like Maine, and I can't remember the other one, but there were only 2 states, and the third-party candidate polled less than 2% of the popular vote. And again, the Democrats gained more seats in both houses. So coming into 1937, Roosevelt had a lot of momentum, maybe too much, because 37 winds up being a year that Roosevelt makes lots of missteps and loses some popularity and really negatively impacts the his ability to institute more reforms from the New Deal. The first of these was what's called the court packing plan. He introduced legislation into Congress to reorganize the nation's courts. Also in fall of 1937, the economy suffered another setback. And finally, by 1938, basically, positive feelings about the New Deal had kind of begun to fade, and people were wanting to move forward past the New Deal. So as we talk about the court packing plan, basically what he wanted to do is expand the Supreme Court by up to 6 judges. He wanted to take it from 9 justices to 15 justices. And of course, he would get to appoint those new members. Congress would have to approve, but he would have the power of appointment. And he argued that the changes were needed to make the courts more efficient. Most people saw this effort to pack the court as a way for him to try to sidestep the Supreme Court, which had ruled against many major parts of the New Deal. They thought that he wanted to get friendly justices that would rule in favor of New Deal programs more often. So the plan didn't pass. The Supreme Court did, however, make some rulings that year that were favorable to the New Deal. For instance, the Supreme Court upheld a minimum wage law in Washington. They ruled in favor of a key element of the Wagner Act, and they also declared Social Security to be constitutional. Both of those things were huge hurdles that were cleared for Roosevelt, and of course Social Security still remains with us today. The second major problem in 1937 is the economy. Up until that time, it had been gaining steam and growing, and unemployment had been cut. But in 1937, you had another little downturn in the economy that started with another sharp drop in the stock market. By the end of the year, 2 million Americans had lost their jobs. And part of this was because Roosevelt and the Congress were trying to cut back on government spending. The deficit had ballooned during this time period, and most members of Congress, and Roosevelt included, as president, wanted to cut the deficit, so they cut back on government spending. So when that government spending was cut back, basically it reduced demand for goods and services and led to slower growth. Unemployment rose during 1937 and 1938, and the government started to pick up spending after that to help the unemployed. And Roosevelt practiced on the belief or the theories of a British economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes. And this is called Keynesian economics. Basically, Keynes argued that when the economy was not doing well, that government should spend a lot of money and create demand for goods and services, which would then create jobs and stimulate the economy. And after the new increases in spending, the economy did begin to rebound in the summer of 1938. So, at the end of 1937, going into 1938, you had mixed results from the New Deal. There had been some improvements. Unemployment had been cut. The economy had been growing very slowly. But all in all, it's really the Depression is still going on. It's not going to be until the onset of World War II that the United States is really going to be able to get out of the Depression. So in your next video, we'll talk about what life was like during the New Deal. We'll analyze how effective the New Deal was, and we'll discuss some of the arguments, pros and cons of the New Deal. Thanks.